Imagine the warm, dusty landscape of ancient Canaan under a sky filled with endless stars. In this place of quiet and wonder, a young Joseph dreamed dreams that would shape his life in ways he could never have anticipated. From cherished son to betrayed brother, from prisoner to prince, his journey would take him through trials and triumphs that reveal the strength of unwavering faith. Joseph's story is a mystery of divine purpose woven through moments of suffering and silence. How could God's hand be present in such pain? Why would a loving God allow so many trials? These questions linger, yet in each chapter of Joseph's life, we catch glimpses of God's plan, guiding him through betrayal and hardship to a destiny he could not have foreseen. As we explore his journey, may we find in his story a reflection of our own lives. Like Joseph, we face valleys of uncertainty, where faith becomes our anchor. His life encourages us to trust that even in silence, God is working, guiding us toward his purpose. May you find comfort, inspiration, and hope as you step into this remarkable story of faith amid adversity. Imagine a young man full of dreams and promises, standing under the star-filled skies of Canaan. Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob, walked with a heart full of hope, believing his dreams pointed to a bright future. Yet he could not foresee that these same dreams would lead him down a path of loneliness and suffering, beginning with the betrayal of his own brothers. Have you ever felt abandoned by those you trusted the most? From a young age, Joseph was blessed with visions he believed were from God. He saw sheaves of grain and stars bowing down to him, and with innocent sincerity shared these visions with his brothers. But those words, spoken with trust, were received with resentment. Jealousy and bitterness grew in the hearts of his brothers, leading them to a shocking act, the betrayal of their own kin. Imagine the pain of knowing that those meant to protect you were the ones who caused you the most suffering. Joseph's brothers even planned to kill him. However, one brother, moved by a sliver of compassion, convinced the others to sell him as a slave instead. And there, in that moment of despair, Joseph was torn from his life, his dreams shattered, his future uncertain. He had no idea what awaited him in Egypt, but amidst the anguish, he chose to hold on to his faith in God. Have you ever had to trust God when all hope seemed lost? The journey to Egypt was long and brutal. Far from home, Joseph must have wondered why God allowed this to happen. Yet, he stayed resolute. He knew his life had a purpose, even though he couldn't see it in that moment. Often, God's ways are mysterious, and we must walk by faith, not by sight. Can we hold on to our faith when everything around us seems to crumble? What Joseph didn't know was that God was with him, even in that foreign land. When we feel betrayed, abandoned, or lost, it's easy to think we're alone, but God never leaves us. He was preparing Joseph, shaping him for something great, even though the pain of the moment seemed overwhelming. Are we willing to believe God is still with us, even in our darkest hours? And so, Joseph entered Egypt as a slave, but with an unshakable faith in God. This moment of betrayal, though painful, would be the first step on his journey to becoming the savior of his people. As we reflect on this story, may we also look beyond our pain, trusting that God is still in control and that our path holds a purpose. Picture Joseph, once free and cherished by his father, now bound in chains, led away from the only home he ever knew. The journey to Egypt was harsh, both physically and emotionally. Gone were the warm, familiar fields of Canaan. In their place was a foreign land, filled with unknown faces and uncertain fates. Have you ever faced a moment when everything familiar was stripped away? In his homeland, Joseph had enjoyed the love of his family, a sense of belonging, and a promise of inheritance. Now, as a slave in Egypt, he owned nothing, not even his freedom. Each step took him further from his family, from his dreams, and from the life he thought he would lead. In moments of isolation, did he question God's plan? Did he wonder if his dreams had been nothing more than illusions? When life changes unexpectedly, do we still believe that God has a purpose? It's in these moments of loss and vulnerability that faith becomes a choice. Joseph could have given in to despair, believing he had been abandoned by both family and God. But he chose to hold on to hope, however faint it might have seemed. This wasn't the life he had imagined, yet he trusted that God was with him, even in the darkness. How do we respond when life doesn't match our expectations? As Joseph adjusted to his new reality, he learned to serve with humility, whether in small or great things. He became a steward in Potiphar's house, and even in a place of captivity, his character shone through. People noticed the integrity and diligence in his work. Perhaps, without realizing it, Joseph was being shaped for something greater. What if our struggles are preparing us for a purpose we can't yet see? Being stripped of freedom was painful, but it was also an opportunity to rely on God more fully. In the unfamiliar, Joseph grew closer to God, discovering strength he didn't know he had. Sometimes, it's in these very moments of brokenness that God's power can work most profoundly in our lives. Are we willing to let God use our hardest moments to build our faith? And so Joseph, once a free man, learned the ways of servitude. Each day taught him resilience, trust, and a deeper understanding of God's presence. He couldn't know what the future held, but he held on to God, believing that even as a servant in a foreign land, his life still held meaning. Imagine Joseph, alone in a dim prison cell, his life seemingly paused in this place of silence and shadows. Days turned into months, and months into years, as he sat with nothing but the quiet echo of his thoughts. Every day looked the same, and the dreams he once held close must have felt like distant memories. How would anyone keep hope alive in such a place? In those dark moments, Joseph's faith became his anchor. He didn't know why God had allowed this, or when it would end, but he chose to believe that God hadn't abandoned him. His faith was no longer about visions of the future, but about trusting God in each passing day. Faith in the darkness isn't about having all the answers. It's about holding on when nothing makes sense. What do we cling to when life seems overwhelming? There must have been days when Joseph wrestled with doubt, wondering if his life would ever change. Yet even in that uncertainty, he leaned into God, allowing the silence to draw him closer to his presence. Sometimes, when life is at its quietest, God's voice can become clearest. He whispers comfort, reminding us that even in the bleakest places, He is near. Do we allow ourselves to find peace in God's quiet presence? Joseph's faith became a light, not just for himself, but for others in that prison. His character, even in suffering, spoke of hope. He continued to serve, to help those around him, and to make the best of his circumstances. Perhaps without realizing it, Joseph was becoming a beacon of God's love in a place void of hope. How can our faith impact those around us, even in our trials? This time in the darkness prepared Joseph in ways he couldn't understand. God was shaping him, refining him, and building resilience that he would one day need. Faith isn't just a comfort, it's a strength that grows stronger in hardship. Sometimes, the silence of waiting is where God does His most profound work in us. Are we willing to let Him work in our lives during the quiet seasons? And so Joseph's faith became his strength. The darkness didn't break him, it built him. He couldn't see the end, but he trusted in the one who held his future. If this message touched your heart, share how faith has helped you through your own times of darkness, or simply comment "hope" to let us know you're with us in this journey of faith. May we too find comfort in knowing that God is with us, even in the moments when life feels uncertain, trusting that each day holds a purpose, even in the waiting. Imagine the endless days Joseph must have faced, each one blending into the next with no sign of change. Time moved slowly in that prison cell, and each sunrise reminded him of a freedom lost, dreams delayed, and a life he could hardly remember. Patience became his only companion in a place where hope was difficult to see. Have you ever felt like your prayers were met with silence? Joseph's journey was not just one of physical endurance, but of spiritual growth. In the waiting, he learned to rely fully on God, finding peace beyond his circumstances. Patience didn't mean he stopped dreaming. It meant he learned to trust in God's timing. Patience allows us to let go of control, to surrender our plans, and to believe that God's purpose will unfold, even if it takes longer than we desire. How do we respond when God asks us to wait? Each day, Joseph could have chosen bitterness, but instead, he chose faith. His patience wasn't passive, it was active and resilient. He continued to serve faithfully, to help others, and to do his best with what little he had. Patience is often tested in adversity, but it also reveals strength we never knew we had. What if patience is God's way of teaching us resilience? The power of patience is that it transforms us. In those waiting seasons, God shapes our character, deepens our faith, and prepares us for what lies ahead. Joseph's patience was not in vain. It was building within him the endurance he would need for the journey God had planned. When we trust in God's timing, we allow him to prepare us for blessings we may not yet see. Are we willing to let patience refine us? Patience doesn't mean we stop longing for change, but it does mean we find peace in the present, trusting that God's plan is greater than our own. Joseph waited years before seeing any change, yet his patience bore fruit in ways he could never have imagined. Patience is not weakness, it is strength under control, a quiet confidence in God's sovereignty. What if we viewed our waiting not as wasted time, but as a divine preparation? And so, Joseph's patience became his strength, a quiet resilience that anchored him through each passing day. As we reflect on his story, may we find encouragement to wait well, to trust that God is working in ways we cannot yet see. In our own seasons of waiting, may we remember that patience, though challenging, has the power to transform us, guiding us toward a future only God can unfold. Imagine Joseph, still a prisoner but with a reputation for wisdom and integrity, being approached by his fellow inmates seeking answers to their dreams. In a place where hope was scarce, Joseph's faith and insight became a light. He listened carefully, acknowledging each dream with compassion and honesty. This was no small task for someone whose own dreams had led him to a life of hardship. Yet Joseph chose to interpret each dream with humility, understanding that these insights came not from himself, but from God. What if we saw our gifts as opportunities to serve others? Joseph's integrity was evident in how he handled these moments. Instead of using his gift to elevate himself, he used it to bring hope to others. He didn't withhold the truth, even when it was hard to hear. His interpretations weren't always pleasant, yet he spoke honestly, trusting that God had a purpose in each revelation. Integrity means staying true to God's truth, even when it's challenging. How often are we willing to speak with honesty and kindness, even when the message is difficult? In that prison, Joseph's gift of interpretation became a source of comfort and direction. Those around him knew they could trust his words, for he had proven himself faithful. His integrity shone through in both his words and his actions, creating a reputation that would eventually reach the ears of Pharaoh himself. Integrity isn't just about what we say, it's about how we live. How do our actions reflect the faith we profess? Joseph's journey reminds us that our gifts are meant to bless others, not just ourselves. In using his abilities with humility and sincerity, he allowed God to work through him in profound ways. Integrity transforms our gifts into vessels of hope and healing. When we serve others selflessly, we become instruments of God's grace. Are we using our gifts to honor God and uplift those around us? The power of integrity is that it builds trust, not only with others, but also with God. Joseph's honesty, even in difficult circumstances, prepared him for the greater responsibilities that lay ahead. His faithfulness in small things allowed him to be entrusted with larger tasks. Integrity in the little moments paves the way for greater purposes. Are we faithful with what we have, trusting that God will use it for his glory? And so, Joseph's gift and integrity continued to grow, turning his prison into a place of service and purpose. As we reflect on his example, may we strive to use our own gifts with humility, honesty, and a heart for others. Let us remember that integrity is the foundation upon which God builds his work in us, preparing us for all he has planned. Imagine the moment when Joseph, a prisoner of many years, is suddenly summoned to stand before Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt. One moment, he is in the darkness of a prison cell, and the next he finds himself in the grandeur of the Egyptian court. In an instant, everything has changed, but Joseph remains calm, humble, and focused. This moment could define his future, and he knows that he must rely on God's wisdom, not his own. How would we respond if faced with such a life-changing opportunity? Joseph stands before Pharaoh, who has been troubled by a series of dreams no one can interpret. Joseph listens carefully, and when asked if he has the ability to interpret dreams, he does not take credit for himself. Instead, he points to God, declaring that only God can reveal the meaning of Pharaoh's visions. In this pivotal moment, Joseph's humility shines through. True greatness comes not from self-promotion, but from a humble reliance on God. Do we remember to give credit to God for the gifts and opportunities we receive? As Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams, he reveals a future of abundance followed by famine, urging Pharaoh to prepare. His insights go beyond simple interpretation. He offers practical wisdom and a plan to save Egypt from the impending crisis. Pharaoh, recognizing Joseph's discernment and integrity, elevates him to a position of authority, second only to himself. In a single day, Joseph's faithfulness is rewarded, and he is transformed from prisoner to prince. Are we ready to step into God's purpose when the time comes? Joseph's journey teaches us that God's timing is perfect. The years of waiting, the trials, and the patience have all prepared him for this moment. If he had not endured the hardships, he might not have been ready to handle such power and responsibility. Sometimes, the path to greatness is paved with challenges that shape our character and deepen our faith. How can we embrace God's timing, trusting that he is preparing us for something greater? In this new role, Joseph remains true to his values. He serves Egypt diligently, storing up resources and planning for the years of famine, knowing that his work will save countless lives. He does not let power corrupt him. Instead, he uses his influence for good, embodying a true servant's heart. Power reveals character, and Joseph's character is unwavering. What would we do with influence and power, and how would we use it to serve others? And so, Joseph steps into his new role with wisdom and grace. His journey from prisoner to prince is a testimony to God's faithfulness and the power of patience and integrity. As we reflect on this transformation, may we be encouraged to trust in God's timing, to remain humble, and to be prepared to serve when he calls. Let us remember that God's plans often surpass our wildest dreams, turning trials into triumphs. Imagine the moment Joseph sees his brothers again, the very ones who had betrayed him and sold him into slavery. Years have passed, and he stands before them not as a broken young man, but as a powerful leader in Egypt. Yet in his heart, the wounds of the past likely linger. Confronted with the faces that once abandoned him, Joseph must decide how to respond. How would we react if we had the chance to face those who had hurt us deeply? Instead of seeking revenge, Joseph chooses a path of forgiveness. He sees beyond his pain, understanding that God had used his suffering to bring him to this place for a greater purpose. This act of grace is not easy, yet Joseph embraces it, letting go of bitterness and choosing love over anger. Forgiveness is not about forgetting the pain, but about releasing its hold on our hearts. Are we willing to let go of past hurts and allow God to bring healing? Joseph's forgiveness allows him to reconnect with his family. He reveals his identity to his brothers with tears, reassuring them that he does not hold their actions against them. In that moment, years of betrayal are met with grace, transforming a family once torn apart by jealousy into one bound by love. Forgiveness opens the door to reconciliation, bringing peace where there was once division. Can we find the courage to offer forgiveness, even when it's undeserved? This act of reconciliation extends beyond Joseph and his brothers. It brings healing to his father, Jacob, who had long mourned the loss of his beloved son. Joseph's decision to forgive doesn't just affect him, it impacts his entire family, creating a legacy of healing and unity. Forgiveness has a ripple effect, often touching the lives of those around us. How might our own acts of forgiveness impact those we love? Forgiveness requires strength and humility, and Joseph's journey shows us that it is possible to forgive even the deepest of wounds. By choosing mercy over resentment, he allows God's love to shine through, becoming an example of grace for all generations. Forgiveness doesn't mean condoning wrong actions, but it does mean surrendering our pain to God, trusting Him to bring justice and peace. Are we willing to trust God enough to forgive those who have wronged us? And so, Joseph's story of forgiveness and reconciliation becomes a testament to the power of grace. In choosing to forgive, he found freedom from bitterness and embraced a future filled with peace. As we reflect on his story, may we be inspired to let go of past hurts, to seek reconciliation, and to allow God's love to heal our hearts. In our own lives, let us strive to forgive as we have been forgiven, paving the way for true peace. Imagine Joseph reflecting on his life, from the betrayal of his brothers to his years in prison and his rise to power in Egypt. Looking back, he can see God's hand in every moment, even in the hardships. What once seemed like random acts of cruelty and misfortune now reveal themselves as steps in God's plan. How often do we look back and realize that God was guiding us all along? Joseph's journey teaches us that adversity is not without purpose. Each trial he faced, whether as a slave or as a prisoner, prepared him for the role he would eventually play. Through each hardship, God was molding him, building resilience, compassion, and wisdom. When we face difficulties, it's natural to feel abandoned, but Joseph's story reminds us that God's presence often shines brightest in our darkest moments. Can we trust that God has a plan, even when we can't see it? In moments of adversity, Joseph chose faith over despair. He trusted that God was with him, even when his circumstances suggested otherwise. This faith became his anchor, giving him the strength to endure each trial with hope. We may not understand why we suffer, but faith allows us to trust that our pain is not in vain. God often uses our struggles to prepare us for something greater. How might God be using our trials to shape us? As second in command of Egypt, Joseph used his experiences to serve others. His insights and compassion, forged through suffering, enabled him to lead with wisdom and humility. He stored up food during the years of plenty, saving countless lives during the famine. In adversity, God was not only preparing Joseph, but equipping him to bless others. What if our hardships are meant to prepare us to help others in ways we don't yet understand? Joseph's life is a reminder that God's providence is always at work, even in the face of injustice and suffering. What seemed like setbacks were actually stepping stones toward a greater purpose. We may not always understand God's plan, but we can trust that He is with us in every situation, working all things for good. Are we willing to believe that God is at work, even when life feels unfair? And so, Joseph's story encourages us to see adversity through a new lens. His journey is a testament to the power of faith and the beauty of God's providence. As we reflect on his story, may we find hope in knowing that our struggles are not meaningless. God is always with us, guiding us through every season of life and using each experience to shape our destiny. Picture Joseph in his later years, looking back on the life he had lived, a journey filled with betrayal, hardship, forgiveness, and triumph. His story is one of unshakable faith, a legacy that would inspire generations to come. Joseph's life teaches us that faith isn't just for the good times. It's a commitment that sustains us through the most challenging moments. What kind of legacy are we building with our own faith? Joseph's faith was marked by resilience. He faced betrayal by his own family, imprisonment, and the uncertainties of life in a foreign land. Yet, through it all, he never wavered in his trust in God. His faith was not dependent on his circumstances, but anchored in his relationship with God. This steadfastness became his legacy, a reminder that faith can endure any storm. How might our own trust in God inspire those around us? Joseph's journey of faith was also a story of forgiveness and love. He showed mercy to those who had wronged him, choosing grace over vengeance. In doing so, he broke the cycle of hatred, bringing healing to his family and future generations. His legacy of forgiveness is one that reminds us of the power of grace. Are we willing to leave a legacy that values forgiveness over resentment? By the end of his life, Joseph had saved countless lives, including his own family, through his wisdom and faithfulness. His story teaches us that God can use one person's faith to impact many. Joseph's legacy is one of hope and provision, showing us that even in our hardest moments, God's purpose prevails. How can we allow God to use our lives as a blessing for others? Joseph's legacy was not only in his actions, but in the example he left for others. His life became a source of strength and inspiration, encouraging others to trust in God, even in adversity. His story reminds us that faith, when lived out with courage and humility, leaves a lasting impact. What kind of impact do we want our lives to have on others? And so, Joseph's legacy of faith lives on, a testament to God's faithfulness and the power of a life fully surrendered to Him. As we reflect on his journey, may we be encouraged to build our own legacy of faith, one that inspires, forgives, and uplifts those around us. Let us remember that our faith has the power to echo through the lives of those we touch, leaving a legacy that glorifies God. Seguindo para o tópico 10, applying Joseph's lessons today. Imagine holding Joseph's story in your heart as you navigate the trials and joys of your own life. His journey, though set in a distant past, offers timeless lessons that resonate deeply today. Like Joseph, we face challenges that test our faith and moments of uncertainty that push us to our limits. But his life shows us that, with faith, we can find purpose in every experience. How might Joseph's journey inspire us to approach our own struggles with hope? One of Joseph's greatest lessons is the power of trust in God's timing. Through every betrayal and hardship, he waited patiently, believing that God's plan would prevail. In our fast-paced world, patience can feel almost impossible, yet Joseph's story reminds us that true faith often requires us to wait. When we surrender our timeline to God, we open ourselves to His perfect timing. Are we willing to trust that God's timing is better than our own? Joseph's forgiveness of his brothers is another powerful lesson. Holding on to resentment can weigh us down, but when we choose forgiveness, we find freedom and peace. Joseph let go of his pain, allowing God to bring healing to his family. In our lives, we too can choose grace over anger, transforming our relationships and freeing our hearts from bitterness. Who in our lives might need our forgiveness today? Joseph also teaches us the value of resilience. Life didn't go as he had planned, but he adapted, finding ways to serve and thrive even in the harshest conditions. His resilience turned adversity into opportunity, preparing him for the purpose God had for him. When we approach life with this kind of resilience, we allow God to work through us, using every season for growth and impact. How can we embrace resilience in our own journeys? Lastly, Joseph's story is one of humility and service. Even as he rose to power, he remained humble, using his position to bless others rather than elevate himself. In a world that often values self-promotion, Joseph's humility shines as a reminder that true greatness is found in serving others. Are we using our influence, no matter how small, to make a positive difference? And so, Joseph's life becomes a guide for our own. His story encourages us to trust, forgive, endure, and serve with humility. As we apply these lessons to our lives, may we find strength in knowing that God is with us in every season, guiding us toward a purpose greater than we could imagine. Let us carry Joseph's legacy forward, living each day with faith, hope, and a heart open to God's plan. As we reach the end of Joseph's story, we are reminded that faith isn't just a word, but a journey of trust, patience, and resilience. From his betrayal by his brothers to his rise as a leader in Egypt, Joseph's life demonstrates the power of unwavering belief in God's presence, even when circumstances seem darkest. His journey speaks to us, showing that every setback and trial can be a step toward a purpose beyond our understanding. Joseph's story is a testament to forgiveness and reconciliation, reminding us that grace has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. His choice to forgive his brothers transformed not only his life, but the lives of future generations. It is a powerful reminder that when we choose forgiveness, we free ourselves and open the door for God to work in ways that surpass our expectations. As you carry Joseph's story with you, may you find encouragement to trust God's timing, to embrace patience in waiting, and to extend grace to others. Let his journey inspire you to see beyond the present, to hold on to faith in God's purpose, and to believe that every experience has meaning. May Joseph's life lead us to deeper trust, and may we walk forward with hope, knowing that God is with us in every season of life.